Praetorian Marcus Antonius Valens had no idea that this sunny day in Capua would prove fatal for him when someone's strong hands pushed him from the amphitheater's balustrade straight onto the arena, where death already awaited him in the form of an experienced gladiator. But Praetorians do not surrender without a fight, even when fate plays the most vile tricks against them. The hot July sun mercilessly scorched the marble steps of Capua's amphitheater when Marcus Antonius Valens took his post at the balustrade. 10 years of service in the Praetorian Guard had accustomed him to the measured flow of guard hours, but today everything was different. Today, the divine Commodus himself was in the city, and the local magistrate had arranged private games in his honor, to which the best gladiators from all of Campania were invited. Marcus adjusted his gladius belt and surveyed the arena below. The sand was already soaked with blood. The third pair of fighters battled with particular ferocity, as if understanding that not only their lives depended on the outcome of this duel, but also the emperor's favor. The Retiarius Aegyptus, dark and sinewy like a predatory cat, circled his opponent, holding his trident and net at the ready. His adversary, a massive secutor in a helmet with a visor, breathed heavily, clearly tiring under the weight of his armor. The crowd roared with delight. 10,000 townspeople, visiting guests and slaves filled the stands to capacity, and every gesture of the gladiators evoked new waves of shouts and applause. In the imperial box, decorated with purple canopies and golden fringe, Commodus himself reclined, surrounded by his retinue. Marcus glanced briefly at his lord. The young emperor looked pleased, occasionally jumping up and gesticulating, clearly enjoying the spectacle. "Finish him," someone from the crowd yelled. "Aegyptus, Aegyptus." The Retiarius seemed to hear the call. He made a feinting movement to the left, then sharply cast his net. The secutor tried to jump back but became entangled in the ropes. Aegyptus did not hesitate, 3 precise strikes with the trident, and his opponent collapsed onto the sand, bleeding profusely. "Miss it?" cried the secutor, throwing down his sword and raising his index finger. The arena froze. All eyes turned to the imperial box. Commodus stood, peering intently at the fallen gladiator. The secutor lay motionless, blood seeping from under his helmet, but he was still alive. The emperor slowly raised his hand. And at that very moment, Marcus felt someone push him hard in the back. The world turned upside down. The rotten wooden railings of the balustrade cracked and broke under his weight. Marcus managed to see the flashing faces of spectators, hear their astonished cries, and then crashed thunderously onto the arena sand 20 paces from Aegyptus. Pain pierced his left shoulder. His vision blurred, but years of military service had done their work. Marcus instinctively rolled and leaped to his feet, grasping for his gladius hilt. His Praetorian armor clanked against the stones, his purple cloak fluttering in the wind. The arena turned into absolute hell. The crowd exploded with such a roar that the amphitheater walls themselves seemed to tremble. Aegyptus stood frozen in bewilderment, still clutching his bloodied trident, staring at the suddenly appeared Praetorian with wide-open eyes. "Gladiator against Praetorian," someone screamed from the stands. "Aegyptus against Caesar's soldier." The cry was taken up by thousands of voices. Spectators leaped from their seats, waving their arms, whistling and hooting. Some threw flowers onto the arena, others copper coins. The air filled with a hum that made Marcus's ears ring. "Fight, fight," the crowd chanted. Marcus quickly looked around. The wounded secutor had somehow crawled to the arena wall, leaving a bloody trail behind him. The judges in white togas exchanged confused glances, not knowing what to do, and in the imperial box. Chaos had erupted. Commodus rose to his full height. His retinue became agitated. Marcus saw how the emperor was quickly conferring with Praetorian prefect Quintus Aemilius Letus. The latter was explaining something heatedly, gesticulating toward the arena. But the crowd was relentless. 10,000 people demanded spectacle, and their voices merged into a single roar. Fight, fight, fight. Commodus raised his hand, demanding silence. Gradually the noise subsided, but tension still hung in the air. The emperor slowly surveyed the arena with his gaze, then pointed to Marcus and Egyptus. Let them fight. His voice rolled across the amphitheater, amplified by excellent acoustics. Praetorian against Gladiator. Let the gods decide who is worthy of victory. The crowd exploded with a new surge of rapture. Trumpets played a triumphal march. Judges raised white cloths, declaring the beginning of the duel. Marcus felt the ground slipping from under his feet. This couldn't be happening. He, a Praetorian, a soldier of the imperial guard, was supposed to fight for the crowd's entertainment against a professional killer. Egyptus meanwhile took a fighting stance. His dark face remained impassive, but something like sympathy flickered in his dark eyes. He spun the trident in his hands and slowly began approaching Marcus, holding the net ready. "Forgive me, Praetorian," he said quietly so the spectators wouldn't hear him, "but I have no choice." Marcus drew his gladius and shield. His heart was beating frantically, but his mind remained clear. There was nowhere to retreat. Behind him rose the 4-meter wall of the arena, crowned with iron spikes. Escaping through the gates wouldn't work either. Guards with spears stood there. "Neither do I," he replied, taking a defensive position. Egyptus moved in a circle, keeping at trident's length distance. His movements were smooth and calculated. Years of training in the gladiator school had not been wasted. Marcus turned following him, not taking his eyes off the sharp prongs of the weapon. He had fought barbarians in Germanic forests, stormed Dacian fortifications in the Carpathians, but had never participated in one-on-one duels before a roaring crowd. "Not bad for a common soldier," Egyptus smirked, making a probing thrust with the net. Marcus jumped back, but the Retiarius hadn't intended to catch him. The net whistled past, and Egyptus had already retreated to a safe distance. The crowd rumbled with displeasure. The spectators thirsted for blood, not dancing. "Come on," someone shouted. "Show him what Roman steel is." Marcus took a step forward, but cautiously. He understood that in this type of combat, experience meant more than strength. Egyptus wielded the trident like an extension of his own hand, every movement precise and economical. And most importantly, he knew how to use the arena's features. The sand underfoot, the bright sun, the blinding reflections from metal. The Retiarius suddenly cast his net but again missed the target. Marcus understood this wasn't an attack but reconnaissance. Egyptus was studying his reaction, speed, fighting style. And only then did the Praetorian notice the strangeness. All of the gladiators' attacks aimed not at vital spots. The trident targeted the shoulder, leg, arm, painful, but not fatal. "What are you doing?" Marcus whispered when they found themselves close to each other. "What I'm paid for," Egyptus replied, but uncertainty could be heard in his voice. He cast the net for the third time, and this time the ropes wrapped around Marcus's shield. The Retiarius pulled sharply, trying to tear the protection from his opponent's hands, but the Praetorian held firm. Taking advantage of the moment, Marcus made a thrust with his gladius, aiming for Egyptus's thigh. The strike missed. The gladiator leaped back with feline agility, but in doing so leaned so close to Marcus that their faces were inches apart. "You're not here by accident, Praetorian," Egyptus quickly whispered. "Your Optio Lucius Sentius paid me to pierce your throat." Marcus nearly dropped his sword in amazement. Optio Sentius. Lucius Sentius, with whom he had served side by side for the past 3 years. The same Sentius who shared wine with him by the campfire and told stories about his campaigns in Britain. "What?" he breathed. Egyptus retreated, spun his trident again and made a false thrust at the chest. The crowd roared with delight, thinking this was the beginning of the decisive battle. "Yes, this is no accident," the Retiarius hissed, parrying Marcus's counterstrike. "You were pushed deliberately. Look at the balustrade, your centurion Gaius Volusius is standing there. Marcus stole a glance upward. Indeed, at the place where he had just been on duty stood Volusius, watching the arena with a stone face. But did this prove anything? "You're lying," Marcus croaked, delivering a cutting blow. "Then why are you still alive?" Aegyptus parried. "I could have killed you 3 times in the time we've been dancing here." And Marcus realized the gladiator was telling the truth. All of Aegyptus's attacks had indeed been more of a fighting imitation than attempts to kill. But why? And what did Sentius have to do with it? Aegyptus retreated to the wall, pretending to be out of breath. The crowd began to whistle and hoot. The spectators demanded more decisive action. In the imperial box, Commodus drummed his fingers impatiently on his chair's armrest. "Listen carefully," the Retiarius whispered when Marcus approached. "I have little time. Your Optio Sentius is preparing an assassination attempt on Caesar, today, at the 6th hour. Marcus's heart skipped a beat. An assassination attempt on the emperor. This was high treason, a crime punishable not only by the traitor's death, but his entire family's. "You've lost your mind," he breathed. "When Commodus is bathing in the magistrate's baths, Sentius and 5 others will penetrate there through a service corridor," Aegyptus continued, simultaneously making broad sweeping movements with his trident for the crowd. "They'll kill the emperor and pin the blame on slave masseurs. And you're the only one in the century who isn't part of the conspiracy. So they decided to eliminate me." Marcus felt cold sweat break out on his forehead. "Exactly. I was told that you somehow learned about the conspiracy and were going to report to the Praetorian prefect." Aegyptus cast his net, but again missed. "Sentius ordered your elimination by foreign hands to leave no traces." Marcus tried to comprehend what he'd heard. Lucius Sentius, brave soldier, veteran of the Dacian Wars, a conspirator. It seemed incredible, but this morning when posts were assigned, it was precisely Sentius who insisted that Marcus guard the balustrade. It was he who pointed out the specific spot, and it was precisely next to this spot that Centurion Volusius now stood. "Why are you telling me this?" Marcus asked, blocking another attack. "What do you care about the emperor? You're still a slave." Aegyptus smiled bitterly. "I was promised freedom if I killed you beautifully, for the public's entertainment. And not only that," Aegyptus continued, making a deceptive movement to the left. "Also an aureus in gold and a plot of fertile land near Lugdunum in Gaul, enough to buy my own slaves and start a new life." "Then why did you reveal your plans to me and spare my life? You're risking all of this for a stranger soldier." Aegyptus smiled bitterly, dodging Marcus's strike. "I realized one simple thing, Praetorian. People who kill emperors aren't in the habit of leaving witnesses alive. What would stop them from eliminating me too, once the deed is done?" He delivered a glancing blow with the shaft to Marcus's wrist, making him loosen his grip. "Dead gladiators don't demand promised rewards." There was bitter truth in these words. Marcus himself understood. The conspirators would eliminate everyone who could connect them to the crime. "And what do you propose?" "I need you alive, Praetorian. Only a soldier of the Imperial Guard can reach Commodus and warn him." Aegyptus jumped back when Marcus tried to strike at his torso. "But first, we need to beautifully finish this spectacle." The crowd was becoming increasingly impatient. Someone threw a rotten apple onto the arena, someone a stone. Spectators began chanting, "Blood, blood, blood." "Less than 2 hours remain until the 6th hour," Aegyptus whispered. "Time is running out." Marcus looked at the sun. It was already inclining westward. Aegyptus was right. There really was little time left. But how to leave the arena without arousing suspicion? How to reach the emperor? And most importantly, how to convince Commodus of the reality of the threat? "Explain Sentius's plan to me in detail," he demanded, blocking a trident strike. "Your sentry is supposed to guard the baths where Caesar is staying," Aegyptus replied, spinning the net overhead. But Sentius has made arrangements with local gladiators. They'll bribe the guards at the main entrance. While the sentries drink wine mixed with sleeping potion, the conspirators will penetrate through the old service corridor that leads directly to the caldarium, the hot baths. Marcus nodded. He knew these baths, a luxurious structure built during Hadrian's time. There really were service corridors there, through which slaves carried wood for the furnaces and removed ashes. Commodus likes to bathe alone, the Retiarius continued. Sentius knows this. When the emperor is relaxing in the hot water, they'll burst in and strangle him. Then they'll blame everything on a slave masseur and raise the alarm, shouting that barbarians attacked Caesar. And the motive? Sentius said something about a new order, about the empire needing a more worthy ruler. Aegyptus shrugged. Politics doesn't interest me. I need freedom. Marcus felt clarity dawning in his head. The conspirators' plan was thought out to the smallest detail. Murder in the baths, where the emperor remains without guard. False culprits in the form of slaves. An alibi in the form of sleeping sentries. And elimination of the only witness, himself, by the gladiator's hands in the arena. But why me? He asked. Why did Sentius decide that I specifically could interfere with the conspiracy? Aegyptus suddenly cast his net for real, and Marcus barely managed to dodge. The ropes whistled right past his ear. Because last evening you asked questions, the Retiarius replied. You wondered why precisely your century was assigned to guard the baths, why the guard couldn't be strengthened since the emperor himself was in the city. Sentius decided you suspected something. Marcus remembered. Indeed, yesterday at dinner he had expressed surprise about such a small guard for the emperor. But that was ordinary soldier's caution, not any suspicions. Now do you understand? Aegyptus made a thrust with his trident, which Marcus parried with his shield. You were removed from the game in advance, so you wouldn't interfere. And now you're the only one who can change everything. How can I believe you? The Praetorian asked, retreating to the arena wall. Maybe this is all a trap. Maybe you just want me to relax. Aegyptus stopped, lowering his trident. Genuine surprise could be read on his dark face. Do you seriously think I'm putting on a show? He pointed to the crowd, which was becoming increasingly impatient. Praetorian, if I wanted to kill you, you'd have been dead 10 minutes ago. I could have cut your throat when you fell onto the arena and hadn't yet come to your senses. This was true. Marcus remembered those first moments after the fall. He had been disoriented, stunned, easy prey for an experienced killer. But Aegyptus hadn't taken advantage of this. And yet, Marcus insisted, why are you going against your employers? What if they don't deceive you? Because I have a daughter, the Retiarius replied quietly. She's 8 years old and lives in Alexandria with my former wife. I've been fighting in this cursed school for 5 years, saving money to buy them both out of slavery. He made a false thrust, with the net to maintain the appearance of combat. If I die here, or if the conspirators kill me later, my daughter will remain a slave. Pain sounded in Aegyptus's voice that no gladiator masks could hide. But if I help save the emperor, perhaps he'll show mercy even to a simple Retiarius who prevented an assassination. Marcus felt his last doubts leaving him. This man was telling the truth. His words contained too much personal pain to be fiction. Very well, he said. I believe you. But how do we get out of this situation? The crowd demands blood and the emperor expects a spectacle. Aegyptus surveyed the stands with his gaze. The spectators were indeed beginning to get restless. Some whistled, some stamped their feet, some shouted unprintable curses. In the imperial box, Commodus frowned and again said something to the Praetorian prefect. We need to give them what they want, the Retiarius said decisively. A beautiful, spectacular fight with a clear outcome. You defeat me, the crowd is satisfied, the emperor pardons the brave defeated. And then you tell him everything you know about the conspiracy. No, Egyptus shook his head. Then Sentius will understand that I betrayed him and will be able to change the plan. You must tell Commodus that you figured everything out yourself. Say you overheard a conversation, or saw something suspicious, or had a prophetic dream, anything, just don't mention me. Marcus nodded. The plan was risky but logical. And how do I reach the emperor? Even if he pardons you and rewards me, that doesn't mean I'll have the opportunity to speak with him privately. A smile touched Egyptus's lips. Leave that to me, Praetorian. I have an idea. Then let's begin, Marcus said, raising his shield and taking a fighting stance. But let's agree neither of us dies for real. Of course, I still need to live. Egyptus gripped his trident shaft tighter. Remember how Germans fight. They like to knock opponents down with unexpected leg sweeps. Marcus remembered. During the Dacian Wars, he had fought Germanic mercenaries in Decebalus's forces. They used crude but effective tactics, first distracting the opponent's attention with feints, then sharply attacking the legs, bringing him down. Understood, he nodded. Let's make it beautiful. Marcus suddenly rushed forward, swinging his gladius overhead and uttering the Praetorian's battle cry. The crowd exploded with a roar of approval. Finally, real battle had begun. Egyptus retreated, holding his trident forward, but Marcus was faster. He ducked under the strike, passed under the Retiarius's guard, and pushed him in the chest with his whole body. Egyptus staggered but stayed on his feet and immediately delivered a counterstrike with the shaft to the Praetorian's shoulder. The blow was calculated, strong enough to look real, but not enough to cause serious harm. Marcus jumped back, rubbing the bruised spot, and went on the attack again. This time he applied one of the techniques taught to him by old centurion Gaius Marcius at the very beginning of his service. Marcus made a deceptive movement to the right, forcing Egyptus to move his trident to block, then sharply turned left and struck with his shield at the Retiarius's arm. Egyptus dropped his net and hissed in pain. The blow landed precisely on bone, but he immediately counterattacked, aiming the trident's prongs at Marcus's thigh. The Praetorian dodged but caught his foot on the fallen net and lost his balance. Now, Egyptus shouted, but instead of a decisive blow, he did what they had agreed upon. The Retiarius sharply lowered his trident shaft and swept Marcus under the knees. He crashed onto the sand but managed to grab his opponent's ankle in the fall. Egyptus also lost his balance and fell nearby. Wrestling in the sand began spectacular, seemingly brutal but carefully choreographed. Marcus rolled, trying to pin the Retiarius with his shield, while the other writhed like a snake, trying to break free. They rolled across the arena, raising clouds of dust, and the crowd went wild with delight. Now I'm doing the final move, Marcus whispered when they found themselves close to each other. Ready. Go ahead, Egyptus replied. Just don't overdo it. Marcus sharply pushed off from the ground, rolled over his shoulder, and found himself behind the Retiarius. Then he applied a hold taught to him by Germanic prisoners, wrapped his left arm around Egyptus's throat and pressed his head to his shoulder with his right. This was a choking technique that Germans called the wolf's grip. The opponent couldn't breathe and would lose consciousness in a few seconds, but if released in time, no harm would be done. Do you surrender? Marcus shouted loudly so the entire arena could hear. Egyptus made several desperate attempts to break free, but it was just a show for the public. Then he slapped Marcus's arm with his palm, a sign of surrender. Miss it, he cried, miss it. The arena exploded with such a roar that Marcus's ears rang. 10,000 spectators leaped from their seats, waving their arms, throwing flowers and coins. Some chanted Marcus's name, some Egyptus's, some simply screamed with delight. Marcus released the defeated Retiarius and rose to his feet, raising his arms to the sky in the traditional victor's gesture. His Praetorian armor was covered with sand and dust, his purple cloak torn in several places, but otherwise he looked quite respectable. Egyptus lay on his side, breathing heavily and rubbing his throat. Several scratches and bruises were visible on his body, but there were no serious wounds. He raised his index finger, a gesture meaning a request for mercy. All eyes turned to the imperial box. Commodus stood and slowly surveyed the arena with his gaze, enjoying the moment. The crowd fell silent, awaiting his decision. "Excellent fight," the emperor proclaimed loudly, and his voice carried across the entire amphitheater. "I haven't seen such courage from both opponents in a long time." He pointed to Aegyptus. "This gladiator fought bravely and with honor. Let him live." The arena exploded with celebration again. Aegyptus struggled to his feet and bowed toward the imperial box, placing his hand on his heart. Then Commodus addressed Marcus. "And you, Praetorian, have shown that soldiers of my guard know how to fight not only in formation, but one-on-one. What is your name?" "Marcus Antonius Valens, divine Caesar," Marcus replied, straightening to attention. "I serve in the century of Optio Lucius Sentius." At the mention of Sentius's name, Aegyptus, still standing nearby, made a barely audible sound, something between a cough and a groan. Marcus understood this was a warning, a reminder that time was running out. "Lucius Sentius," Commodus frowned as if trying to remember something. "Yes, I know this man, a brave soldier, veteran of the Dacian campaigns." "Yes, Caesar." "Well then, Marcus Antonius Valens," the emperor smiled, "your bravery deserves reward. Tonight you will share a meal with me at the magistrate's house. Let your comrades know, their Caesar knows how to value valor." Marcus's heart leaped with joy. An invitation to the feast meant the opportunity to be near the emperor, but how to ensure Aegyptus's presence? "Divine Caesar," he proclaimed loudly, "allow me to appeal to your magnanimity with one request." Commodus raised an eyebrow. "Speak, Praetorian." "This Retiarius fought worthily and bravely. He has earned the right to serve Caesar himself." Marcus pointed to Aegyptus. "Allow me to bring him to the feast as a servant, so he may see with his own eyes his ruler's mercy." Silence reigned in the imperial box. The Praetorian prefect quickly whispered something in Commodus's ear, but the emperor waved him away. "An interesting request," he finally said. "You want the gladiator who just tried to kill you to serve at my table." "He fought by the arena's rules, Caesar," Marcus replied. "Now he is defeated and no longer dangerous, and his presence will show everyone that divine Commodus is merciful even to his defeated enemies." Commodus pondered. Marcus saw how the emperor weighed all the pros and cons. On one hand, the request was unusual. On the other, it flattered Commodus's vanity, who loved to display his magnanimity. "So be it," the emperor finally decided. "But let this Retiarius know, the slightest carelessness on his part will cost him his life." The crowd rumbled with approval again. Commodus raised his hand, demanding silence. "And now let the arena be cleared for the next battles. We have many more spectacles ahead." When the crowd's noise began to subside, Marcus and Aegyptus slowly headed for the arena exit. Guards opened the iron gates leading to the amphitheater's underground chambers. There, in the cool stone corridors, they could speak calmly without fearing foreign ears. "Excellently played," Aegyptus whispered when they disappeared from the spectators' view. "Your request to take me to the feast was simply brilliant." "You were counting on this from the very beginning?" Marcus asked, removing his helmet and wiping sweat from his forehead. "I was hopping," the Retiarius admitted. "Commodus loves spectacular gestures, and what could be more spectacular than mercy to a defeated enemy?" They passed by cages containing wild beasts, past weapon storerooms and rest rooms for gladiators. Here it smelled of sweat, blood, and fear, the usual companions of any amphitheater. "Now we have access to the emperor," Marcus said. "But how do we convince him of the reality of the threat? You understand, if I'm wrong, if there really is no conspiracy, I'll be executed for false denunciation." Egyptus stopped at a fountain flowing in the center of one corridor. He scooped a handful of water and washed the abrasion on his shoulder. "The conspiracy exists," he said with conviction. "I saw Sentius passing money to one of the bath guards. I saw them drawing a building plan in the sand. I heard them discussing the attack time." "But I have no proof," Marcus objected. "Only your words as a slave gladiator against those of a respected optio." "But you have the opportunity to check my words," Egyptus smiled. "Tell Commodus you suspect something wrong. Suggest he change his evening plans, for example, not go to the baths but stay at the magistrate's house. Watch Sentius and his men's reaction." This was a reasonable idea. If the conspiracy really existed, then changing the emperor's plans would cause panic among the conspirators. They would try to object, find pretexts to still lure Commodus to the baths. "And if they agree to changing plans?" Marcus asked. "Then you'll look overly cautious but not traitorous," Egyptus replied. "Commodus might even praise you for vigilance." They reached the amphitheater exit. Outside, palanquins awaited them. The emperor had ordered the heroes of the day to be delivered to the magistrate's house with honors. "Remember the main thing," Egyptus said before they went to different palanquins. "Not a word about getting information from me. Say you suspected something yourself, or received an anonymous warning, or had a prophetic dream. Anything, just not me." "Understood," Marcus nodded. "And what if they try to change the plan, move the assassination to another time or place?" "Then I'll be near you and can warn you," the Retiarius replied. "Don't forget, now I'm your servant for the evening. I'll be serving at the table and watching everything that happens." Marcus got into the palanquin, and slaves lifted it to their shoulders. Through the curtains he saw Egyptus settling into the neighboring palanquin. The Retiarius looked calm, but Marcus noticed how he nervously clenched and unclenched his fists. Ahead of them awaited a feast with the emperor, and possibly the exposure of a conspiracy that could change the fate of the entire empire. Could he trust Egyptus? What if this was all his cunning plan to get personally close to the emperor himself? The sun was beginning to decline westward. Very little time remained until the 6th hour. Magistrate Gaius Lucius Maximus's villa impressed even a well-traveled Praetorian with its luxury. Marble columns decorated with golden capitals supported a painted ceiling where Olympic gods soared among clouds. Mosaic floors depicted scenes from the Iliad, and walls were faced with rare Numidian marble with veins the color of sunset. The villa's main triclinium was prepared for the imperial feast. 3 large couches of ivory, covered with purple cushions, formed a horseshoe around a low table of black ebony. On the imperial couch reclined Commodus himself in a snow-white toga with purple trim, and around him were placed Praetorian Prefect Quintus Aemilius Letus, Magistrate Maximus, 3 local senators, and several high officers of the garrison. Marcus sat to the emperor's right hand, an exceptional honor for a simple Praetorian. He hadn't had time to change after the fight, and his armor was still covered with arena sand, while his purple cloak showed torn traces from Egyptus's net. But Commodus seemed to find this appropriate. The emperor several times looked approvingly at his hero of the day. "Magnificent fight, Marcus Antonius," he repeated, sipping wine from a golden cup. "I haven't seen such courage in a long time. You fought like a true Roman." Egyptus stood by the far wall of the triclinium with other servants. His wounds had been washed and bandaged with clean cloth, but he still looked like what he was, a gladiator who had fought to the death just hours ago. Other slaves glanced at him with curiosity and some wariness. The feast began with libations to the gods. A priest of Jupiter, a gray-haired old man in a white toga, pronounced a solemn prayer and poured some wine on a portable altar. Then began the traditional course changes: gustatio with honey and eggs, then prima mensa with roasted boar decorated with laurel branches, and finally secunda mensa with sweets and fruits. Conversation at the table flowed unhurriedly and concerned mainly local affairs: harvest, trade, construction of new baths on the city's outskirts. Commodus looked relaxed and pleased, occasionally joking with guests and praising the local cook's skill. Marcus tried to concentrate on the conversation, but his thoughts were occupied with something entirely different. Where was Sentius? Why hadn't the Optio appeared at the feast, although his century was guarding the emperor? And most importantly, when would the conspirators make their new attempt? The answer to the last question came faster than he expected. The second course was nearing its end when a procession of servants with large amphorae entered the triclinium. They carried special wine, expensive Falernian from a 50-year-old vintage, that the magistrate saved for the most solemn occasions. Marcus mechanically followed the servants with his gaze and suddenly froze. Among the wine-bearers dressed in identical white tunics, he saw a familiar face, a dark young man with a characteristic scar running from his left ear to the corner of his mouth. Marcus had remembered this scar from the morning when he checked the guards at the Gladiator school before the games. The young man skillfully handled the amphora, pouring wine into cups, but his movements betrayed not a servant but a fighter. Too precise, too controlled, exactly how experienced gladiators moved, accustomed to the fact that any careless movement could cost their life. Marcus glanced at Aegyptus. The Retiarius had also noticed the disguised gladiator and barely perceptibly shook his head, a danger sign they had agreed to use in the amphitheater's underground. "Excellent wine," Commodus meanwhile exclaimed, tasting the drink. "Maximus, you've outdone yourself." The magistrate smiled contentedly, accepting compliments. The other guests also praised the taste and aroma of the Falernian, but Marcus no longer listened to their words. All his attention was riveted on the fake wine-bearer. The young man slowly moved through the triclinium, filling guests' cups. He behaved like a real slave, modestly lowering his gaze, not looking into patricians' faces, answering questions only monosyllabically. But when he thought no one was watching him, something hard and determined flickered in his eyes. "Is this boy new?" Commodus suddenly asked, pointing to the false wine-bearer. "I don't remember him among your slaves, Maximus." The magistrate was momentarily confused. This is one of the gladiators, divine Caesar," he replied. "We took several of them to serve at the feast as additional security, just in case." The lie was clumsy, but Commodus seemed not to notice. The emperor was in good spirits and not inclined to suspect treachery in every word. "A reasonable precaution," he approved. "Gladiators know the value of obedience." The false wine-bearer meanwhile continued his business. Marcus noticed that he poured wine from 2 different amphorae, one for ordinary guests, the other for the emperor. The Praetorian's heart began beating faster. Had the conspirators changed their plan and decided to poison Commodus right here at the feast? Aegyptus, still standing by the wall, tried to attract Marcus's attention. When their eyes met, the Retiarius barely perceptibly nodded toward the false wine-bearer and made a gesture meaning danger. Meanwhile, the feast entered its final phase. Servants removed the remains of second courses and brought sweets, honey cakes, candied fruits, nuts, and wine. Commodus was clearly pleased with the treat and company. "And now," he solemnly announced, "it's time for a special cup. Maximus, surely you'll bring that very golden cup you gave me in honor of my arrival." The magistrate beamed and clapped his hands. Immediately a slave appeared with a magnificent cup of pure gold, decorated with relief images of Hercules' feats. This was truly imperial, where such cups cost a fortune and were passed down through generations. "Let this cup be filled with the best wine for the best of emperors," Maximus proclaimed. And then Marcus saw the false wine-bearer step forward, preparing to take the precious cup. In his hands was that very special amphora from which he had poured for no one else. The Praetorian felt the hair on his neck stand on end. This was it, the conspiracy's decisive moment. But how to act? If he now shouted about poison, he'd be considered mad. If he tried to snatch the cup from the emperor's hands, it would be interpreted as an assassination attempt. And there was no time for explanations. The false wine bearer was already taking the golden cup and beginning to pour wine into it. Marcus stole a glance at Egyptus. The Retiarius stood tense, ready for action but bound by his role as a slave. What could he do? Rush across the entire triclinium and try to stop the poisoner? That would be suicide. The false wine bearer raised the amphora over the golden cup. Wine flowed in a thin stream, sparkling in the oil lamp's light. But Marcus noticed how the young man imperceptibly turned his hand, and something white powder from a ring fell into the precious cup and instantly dissolved in the wine. "There we are, divine Caesar," the false wine bearer said with a bow, extending the cup to the emperor. Commodus reached out to take the cup. Seconds remained until catastrophe. And then Marcus made his decision. "Divine Caesar," he exclaimed loudly, sharply rising from his couch, "allow me to drink to your health first, as befits a Praetorian." Everyone in the triclinium turned to him. Commodus raised an eyebrow in surprise. "What custom is this, Marcus Antonius?" "An ancient custom, Caesar," Marcus feverishly improvised. "When a Praetorian is honored to share a meal with the emperor, he must first taste every drink to show he is ready to die for his lord." This was outright fiction, but it sounded plausible. Commodus loved rituals and ceremonies, especially those that emphasized his greatness. "Interesting," the emperor said thoughtfully. "I don't remember such a custom, but I like it, so be it." Marcus stepped toward the false wine bearer and reached for the cup. The young man hesitated for a moment. This clearly wasn't part of his plan, but refusing a Praetorian in front of everyone would be impossible. "Just be careful, soldier," the magistrate said. "The cup is very expensive." "Of course," Marcus replied, taking the golden chalice. And then he slipped. Marcus's left foot slid on a small puddle of oil that had formed under one of the lamps. He swayed, waved his arms trying to maintain balance, and the golden cup flew from his hands, describing a high arc over the triclinium. The precious wine splashed in the air, then the cup clanged as it hit the mosaic floor, spilling the remaining drink across the white marble. "Clumsy fool," the magistrate cried, clutching his head. "You've ruined a cup by Myron himself." But the cup, fortunately, wasn't severely damaged. The gold had only dented in one place. However, the wine had spread across the floor in a dark puddle, glistening in the lamplight. "Forgive me, divine Caesar," Marcus exclaimed, falling to his knees. "I have disgraced myself before." He didn't finish the sentence. A small greyhound, the emperor's favorite dog named Cerberus, ran to the spilled wine puddle. The graceful dog, ignoring its master's shouts, eagerly began lapping the wine from the floor. "Cerberus, away," Commodus cried. "Wine is harmful for—" The emperor didn't finish. The greyhound suddenly froze, then began convulsing. White foam poured from the animal's mouth, its eyes rolled back, and in a few seconds the dog lay dead. Deathly silence reigned. Everyone stared at the dead animal with horror and bewilderment. The first to break the silence was the priest of Jupiter. The old man rose from his couch, stretched his arms toward the ceiling, and solemnly proclaimed, "A sign! Great Jupiter has shown us a sign. He saved the life of divine Caesar, using the Praetorian's clumsiness as an instrument of his will." "Poison," someone whispered among the guests. There was poison in the wine. All eyes turned to the false wine-bearer. The young man stood pale as a sheet, and undisguised horror could be read in his eyes. He understood the game was lost. "Seize him," Commodus roared, jumping from his couch. But the poisoner didn't intend to surrender without a fight. He hurled the empty amphora at the nearest guard and rushed for the exit. However, Egyptus blocked his path. The Retiarius, forgetting his slave role, intercepted the fugitive at the very doors and knocked him to the floor with a single punch to the jaw. "Well done, slave," Commodus shouted. "Hold the scoundrel tight." Guards bound the false wine-bearer with ropes and forced him to kneel before the emperor. The young man no longer tried to pretend to be a submissive slave. Hatred burned in his eyes. "Who are you?" Commodus asked coldly. "And who sent you to kill me?" The poisoner remained silent, clenching his teeth. "Speak," Praetorian Prefect Letus roared, "or we'll make you talk." But the prisoner only spat blood on the mosaic floor. Commodus looked attentively at the spilled wine, then at the dead dog, then at the bound conspirator. "This villain wanted to poison me," he said slowly. "Let him experience the effect of his own concoction." The emperor turned to one of the servants. "Bring a sponge from the nearest toilet. We'll make this wretch drink the same wine he prepared for me." The servant returned in a few minutes with a sponge on a wooden stick, the usual device Romans used in toilets for hygiene. By Commodus's order, they soaked up the poisoned wine from the floor with the sponge and squeezed it into the bound poisoner's mouth. The young man tried to resist, but guards held him firmly, and one of them pinched his nose, forcing him to open his mouth. The poison acted quickly. In a minute the conspirator began convulsing, and a few seconds later he died, never having said a word about his accomplices. "Just retribution," Commodus said coldly, looking at the dead body. "Let all know, whoever raises a hand against the Son of Gods will perish by his own weapon." Then the emperor addressed Marcus. "And you, Marcus Antonius Valens, saved my life. Though your clumsiness was the god's instrument, without your vigilance I might not have noticed the danger." "I don't deserve praise, Caesar," Marcus replied, still kneeling. "I only fulfilled my Praetorian duty." "No," Commodus objected decisively. "You did more than duty required, and the gods rewarded you for it." The emperor removed a massive golden chain from his neck, a sign of imperial favor, and placed it on Marcus. "From now on you are not just a Praetorian, but a centurion of my guard," Commodus solemnly announced. "Let all see how I reward loyalty and bravery." Then he turned to Egyptus. "And you, Gladiator, showed that former enemies can become faithful allies. By seizing the poisoner, you too served Rome." Commodus pondered for a moment, then continued. "I declare you a free man. Moreover, I grant you a plot of land in Campania sufficient to feed a family. Let your bravery be rewarded." Egyptus fell to his knees, and Marcus saw tears of gratitude flowing down the Retiarius's face. Now he could buy his wife and daughter out of slavery and start a new life. The feast ended there. After the assassination attempt on the emperor, no one was in the mood for celebration. Commodus was taken under heavy guard to a safe place, and Praetorian Prefect Letus began investigating the conspiracy. By morning, Optio Lucius Sentius, Centurion Gaius Volusius, and 3 other Praetorians were arrested. Under torture, they confessed to preparing the assassination and named the remaining accomplices. All conspirators were executed in the arena of the same amphitheater, where Marcus had fought for his life just hours before. They were fed to wild animals. A month later, Marcus received a letter from Egyptus from his new estate near Naples. "Dear friend, the gods did not bring us together by chance. Thanks to you, my daughter Cleopatra is now free and learning to read from the best teachers. My wife Isis manages the household and says she prays for you every day. If service ever brings you to Campania, my house is always open to Centurion Marcus Antonius Valens, who saved the emperor's life and a simple gladiator's honor. May the gods preserve you." Marcus folded the letter and hid it in his chest next to the golden chain, a reward for that strange day when an accidental fall onto the arena changed his fate and the empire's destiny. And in Capua's gladiator school, they still tell the legend of the Retiarius Egyptus, who refused the conspirators' gold for the sake of honor and received freedom from the emperor's own hands. Only Emperor Commodus was unlucky, who was strangled by a slave anyway later on.